Around 30 migrant buses are entering Chicago daily, turning its roads into a battleground of controversy and chaos. Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration isn't shying away from the fight. They're impounding buses and launching lawsuits. But why the sudden surge of buses? With more than 25 arrivals a day, Chicago is feeling the strain. Behind the legal battles and impounded buses are real people seeking safety and security. So what will come out of all of this? Chicago, a city renowned for its bustling streets, iconic skyline, and vibrant culture, now finds itself in the middle of an unprecedented challenge. A surge of around 30 migrant buses flooding its thoroughfares. The once familiar rhythm of urban life has been disrupted by the relentless arrival of buses packed to the brim with migrants seeking shelter and refuge. Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration, faced with this sudden influx, has taken bold and decisive action. No longer willing to turn a blind eye to the chaos unfolding on its streets, the city council swiftly passed measures to impound migrant buses. Yes, you heard it right, impoundment. These buses, once symbols of hope for those seeking a better life, are now met with legal repercussions as they roll into the city. But impounding buses is just the beginning.
Community members want to make their voices heard on this subject, and tonight many weren't able to. On the table is a proposal from Mayor Brandon Johnson that would place hundreds of migrants in makeshift camps in a former Jewel parking lot.
Mayor Johnson's administration has gone a step further, launching lawsuits against the very bus companies responsible for this migrant deluge. It's a move that speaks volumes about the city's determination to regain control of its streets and uphold the rule of law. Think about it. More than 55 lawsuits filed since the implementation of new regulations last month. That's not just a number, it's a testament to the seriousness with which Chicago is tackling this crisis. The message is clear. No more rogue buses, no more unauthorized drop-offs. But why the sudden surge of migrant buses? Well, state leaders have warned of up to 30 buses arriving in Chicago each day. That's a staggering number, and it's putting immense pressure on the city's resources and infrastructure. With buses arriving left, right, and center, it's no wonder Mayor Johnson's administration is taking drastic measures to stem the tide. And let's not forget the human side of the story. Behind every migrant bus is a group of individuals, families, and children seeking safety and security. Yet their journey is marred by uncertainty and legal battles. As buses are impounded and lawsuits are filed, the fate of these migrants hangs in the balance, caught in the crossfire of political turmoil and administrative crackdowns. As you navigate the streets of Chicago, spare a thought for the migrant buses rolling in and the lives they carry. Behind the headlines and legal battles lies a human story of hope, resilience, and struggle. And as Mayor Johnson's administration grapples with the surge of buses, one thing is clear. The road ahead is paved with challenges, but also with the possibility of a more just and compassionate city. Which brings us to the legal battles and implications. More than 55 lawsuits filed against bus companies since the implementation of new regulations. That's not just a legal skirmish, it's a full-blown legal showdown. The city isn't mincing words or wasting time. It's taking decisive action to hold these bus operators accountable for their role in exacerbating the crisis. But what exactly are these legal actions targeting? Well, it's all about enforcing the rules on when and where buses can arrive. No more clandestine drop-offs or bypassing regulations. Mayor Johnson's administration is saying enough is enough, and it's using the full force of the law to make its point. And let's talk about the impact of impounding buses and closing migrant shelters. On one hand, it's a necessary step to regain control over the city's streets and uphold the rule of law. But on the other hand, it raises serious questions about the city's promise of shelter for those in need.
The city of Chicago has closed 4 temporary migrant shelters, saying the individuals have been moved to other shelters.
Think about it. Closing migrant shelters means denying refuge to those who have already endured so much. It's a tough pill to swallow, especially in a city known for its welcoming spirit. Yet Mayor Johnson's administration is standing firm, prioritizing public safety and legal compliance above all else. But here's the thing. Navigating the legal maze isn't easy. There are implications, both intended and unintended, that ripple through the city. Closing migrant shelters may reduce the strain on resources, but it also leaves vulnerable individuals out in the cold, quite literally. It's worth pondering the broader implications for Chicago's promise of shelter and sanctuary. Can the city strike a balance between enforcing the law and extending a helping hand to those in need? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, but one thing's for sure: the legal landscape is shaping the future of Chicago's migrant crisis in ways we can't yet fully grasp. And is the situation escalating? State leaders are sounding the alarm, warning of up to 25 buses of migrants arriving in the city every single day. That's not just a trickle, it's a flood, overwhelming the city's resources and infrastructure. Imagine being in the shoes of government officials tasked with managing this crisis. It's like trying to plug a leaky dam with your bare hands while the water keeps rushing in. The challenges are daunting, to say the least, and controlling the influx of migrants is proving to be an uphill battle. But what exactly are these challenges? Well, for starters, there's the sheer scale of the crisis. With up to 25 buses arriving daily, the government is stretched thin, scrambling to find enough shelter, resources, and support for the incoming migrants. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. No matter how hard you try, it just doesn't seem to fit. Then there's the logistical nightmare of managing the influx, coordinating the arrival of buses, processing migrants, and ensuring their safety and well-being. It's like herding cats.
The marchers are also asking for more help and money for the 8,000 migrants who've been bused to Chicago by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and who are currently living in police stations and other public facilities because of the lack of shelter space.
It requires careful planning, coordination, and resources that the government simply doesn't have in abundance. And let's not forget about public safety. With the surge of migrants comes an increased risk of crime and violence, putting a strain on law enforcement and exacerbating tensions in already vulnerable communities. It's a delicate balancing act between compassion and security, and the government is walking a tightrope with no safety net. The government finds itself caught between a rock and a hard place. It's a daunting task, to say the least, but one thing's for sure: the road ahead is paved with challenges, and the government's ability to navigate through them will determine the fate of Chicago's migrant crisis. And there's another side to this: criminal activity. First off, let's address the facts. Reports are flooding in about migrant involvement in criminal activities, ranging from burglaries to violence. Groups of migrants charged with burglaries in DuPage County, attempted home invasions caught on camera, and armed robberies targeting unsuspecting residents. It's like a scene straight out of a crime thriller, but unfortunately, it's happening right here in Chicago. But here's where things get even more concerning: the connection between migrants and local gangs. Yes, you heard it right. As if the surge in criminal activities wasn't enough, now we're talking about gangs getting involved, and that's a whole new level of trouble. Think about it: migrants, many of whom are vulnerable and desperate, becoming prime targets for recruitment by local gangs looking to bolster their ranks. So, what does all of this mean for the safety and well-being of Chicago residents?
All those groups all say that the recent influx is a serious problem. I do think that the migrant issue is very much affecting how voters view the president.
Well, let's just say it's not looking good. With criminal activities on the rise and gangs getting involved, the city's streets are becoming increasingly dangerous. It's like a ticking time bomb, with residents living in fear of becoming the next victim of a burglary, robbery, or worse. But here's the thing: we can't just bury our heads in the sand and hope for the best. We need to address the root causes of this problem, whether it's poverty, lack of opportunity, or something else entirely. We need to come together as a community to support those in need and crack down on criminal elements that threaten our safety and security. So, are policies going to be changed? Since October 2022, Chicago has spent nearly $300 million on the migrant crisis. That's a hefty sum no matter how you slice it. And with 573 buses arriving in the city since last summer, the financial burden is only getting heavier. It's like trying to plug a leak in a sinking ship with a handful of pennies. It's just not going to cut it. But here's where things get interesting. Proposed regulations and penalties for bus operators violating the rules. Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration isn't just sitting back and watching the money fly out the window. It's taking action. We're talking about regulations that would slap hefty fines, upwards of $10,000 on any bus operator daring to flout the rules on when and where to drop off migrants. And let's not forget about impounding buses. Oh yes, you heard it right. Mayor Johnson's administration isn't afraid to wield the impoundment hammer against bus operators who refuse to play by the rules. It's a bold move to be sure, but one that sends a clear message: follow the rules or face the consequences. But here's the thing. Will these policy changes and penalties be enough to stem the tide of migrant buses flooding into Chicago? It's a tough question, and one that doesn't have an easy answer. But one thing's for sure, the city is taking decisive action to address the financial burden and rein in the chaos on its streets. As we crunch the numbers and weigh the options, one thing's clear. The migrant crisis isn't just a humanitarian issue, it's a financial one. And until we find a solution that addresses both, the city's coffers will continue to bleed, and the chaos will continue to reign. And what are the views of the governor? Mayor Brandon Johnson isn't holding back when it comes to pointing fingers at Texas Governor Greg Abbott for his role in exacerbating the migrant crisis. It's like a game of political hot potato, and Mayor Johnson isn't about to let Governor Abbott off the hook. So what's all the fuss about? Well, it all boils down to Governor Abbott's decision to send migrants to sanctuary cities like Chicago without adequate provisions. It's a move that Mayor Johnson isn't too pleased about, to say the least. He's calling it reckless and harmful, and he's not mincing words when it comes to placing the blame squarely on Governor Abbott's shoulders. We've got the Biden administration stepping into the ring too. With political implications as high as the Sears Tower, the Biden administration is feeling the heat from all sides. On one hand, there's pressure to address the crisis head-on and find a solution that doesn't involve passing the buck to sanctuary cities like Chicago. On the other hand, there are political considerations to weigh, with midterm elections looming on the horizon. How is the Biden administration responding to all of this? Well, it's a mixed bag, to be honest. On one hand, you've got President Biden urging Republicans to reconsider a bipartisan Senate border bill killed by, you guessed it, Republicans in the House. It's like a political game of chess, with moves and countermoves that could determine the fate of the migrant crisis and the political landscape as a whole. But here's the thing. While politicians play their games and trade barbs, real people are suffering. Families are being torn apart, communities are being stretched thin, and the city of Chicago is bearing the brunt of it all. So, as the political drama unfolds, let's not lose sight of the human cost of this crisis. Because at the end of the day, it's not about politics or power. It's about people, and finding a solution that puts their needs first. And the public is pissed about this. Chicago residents incensed, directing their ire at Mayor Brandon Johnson and President Joe Biden for what they see as a failure to address the migrant crisis effectively. It's like a powder keg waiting to explode, with anger simmering just below the surface. And then there are the protests. Oh yes, you heard it right, anti-migrant protests popping up like daisies across the city, with residents taking to the streets to voice their discontent. It's like a scene out of a movie, with signs waving and chants ringing out, demanding action from those in power. But what's driving all this outrage and protest? Well, it's a complex mix of factors, to be sure. Some residents feel betrayed by city leadership, accusing Mayor Johnson and his administration of prioritizing migrants over Chicago's own citizens. Others are concerned about the safety and well-being of their communities, fearing the consequences of unchecked migration and rising crime rates. And let's not forget about the national stage. With midterm elections on the horizon, politicians are feeling the pressure to address the issue head-on, lest they face the wrath of voters come election day. It's like a high-stakes game of political poker, with chips on the table and reputations on the line. But here's the thing. Amidst all the anger and frustration, there's a sense of solidarity among Chicago residents. They may disagree on the best way to address the migrant crisis, but they're united in their desire to see action taken and solutions found. It's like a rallying cry for change, with voices raised and fists clenched in determination. As the city grapples with public outrage and anti-migrant protests, one thing's for sure. The conversation isn't going away anytime soon. Whether it's on the streets, in City Hall, or on the campaign trail, Chicago residents are making their voices heard loud and clear, and it's up to local and national leaders to listen and respond accordingly. On one side of the ring, you've got advocates for migrants, arguing that they deserve support and resources just like anyone else. After all, Chicago has long prided itself on being a welcoming city, a melting pot of diversity and inclusion. But on the other side, you've got residents raising concerns about the mismanagement of taxpayer dollars and the priorities of city leadership. Since October 2022, Chicago has reportedly spent nearly $300 million on the migrant crisis. That's a hefty chunk of change, no matter how you slice it. And with hundreds of buses arriving in the city since last summer, the financial burden is only getting heavier. It's like trying to plug a leak in a sinking ship with a handful of pennies. It's just not going to cut it. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.